Hello and welcome everybody to another live chat here on YouTube. I am your host, Jensen Beeler of Asphalt Rubber, and today I am very lucky to be joined by MIPS co-founder, Dr. Peter Halldin. Peter, I'm super excited to have this conversation. MIPS is a brand I've been turned on to recently in the last year or so, and I'm a big believer in what you guys are doing. So I was hoping today that we could have a pretty frank conversation about helmet safety, what it means to deal with the rotational forces that impact the human head, and what MIPS is doing to mitigate those things. So hoping that we'll get some comments from our viewers in the chat. Just a heads up to everyone that's watching, it does take about 20 seconds for the video to catch up to what the chat is. There's a bit of a lag, but we'll try to address them as we get going and weave those questions into the conversation. So with that, Peter, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for letting me be here, and it will be really nice to chat with you and to give some information on what MIPS has done and what we are currently doing every day.
Yeah, maybe you can kind of give me a background for those that aren't familiar with MIPS. First of all, what does it stand for? And second, what are you guys doing as a company? What's your goal?
Yeah, MIPS was invented in 1996, and MIPS stands for Multi-Directional Impact Protection System. And we came up with the idea, or I and my supervisor, when I started my PhD on a technical university in Stockholm, Sweden, came up with the idea. 1996, I just started my PhD on head and neck injury biomechanics. And we tried to combine technical and medical competence to try to figure out better protective or preventive systems for the human head and the brain and the neck. So when I started, I didn't know much about helmets. I didn't know much about the brain or how you fall from a motorcycle, etc. But we started to investigate both how the head works. Soon we understood that one of the safety systems that we have in our head and the brain is that the brain can slide against the skull in this so-called cerebrospinal fluid. So the brain can slide a little bit. And I told my supervisor, Professor Hans von Holst, that maybe we can copy this system into a helmet. And that's actually how it all started, but we didn't know really where that would take us at 1996.
It's a bit of biomimicry then.
Yeah, it is.
So where is MIPS now? I mean, well, let's back it up maybe for a little bit further. When I went and visited you guys last year, one of the things that really impressed me was the body of research that is around this subject and kind of the awareness that's been increasing in this space, especially, unfortunately, maybe due in part to America with American football. Can you give me like an overview of how brain injuries come about, what concussions are, what that means, physically in our brain, what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to take us a little bit back in time. I mean, to understand everything. At that time, when we started to do our research, there were actually really no one talking about rotation in combination with a helmet. Researchers, especially in US, had as early as 1940 and more 1970, when they conducted experiments and understood that the human brain, is much more sensitive to rotational motion than linear motion. And at that time, and still, most helmets are developed for the pure linear motion, while, as we then understand now, that the brain is more sensitive to rotation. And we know that there is a lot of debate in US right now, concussions in American football, and that there is a lot of effort put in to try to solve this problem. And I mean, to one sense, it is a problem. In another sense, we never say that any helmets on the market today are bad. all helmets are good, and the most important is that you wear a helmet. But then, with new knowledge and to optimize the helmet also for the rotational part, we can make the helmet even better and saving both lives and more moderate, mild injuries as a concussion.
It seems like the research in the space is coalescing on the idea of how serious traumatic brain injuries are. I mean, the name itself sounds very serious, but in terms of, I think we've always underestimated what TBIs are doing to us physically. What's the state of the research in terms of the rotational force versus the linear force? Can you kind of describe the research in that space? Because I think for me, especially when talking about MIPS, it's really important to ground everything in the science first and then talk about the product.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the test, I'm always coming back to the test methods because that is the tools that the helmet manufacturers are using when they design helmets. So, and when it comes to the research, I think we know very much how to reduce the linear acceleration that is coupled to the risk for skull fracture. And that is, of course, to have the helmet, and if you have a thick helmet enough, you can reduce this the linear force by absorbing with the distance, and you get compression of the EPS or the material that you have in the helmet that works together to reduce this forces in the same way as you want to have a long hood on your car when you impact to a wall. Okay? But when it comes to the rotation, the human head and the brain is very special. If you compare the head and the brain with the rest of the body, this reducing the linear part is very much what you need to do to reduce the risk to get a fracture on your arm or a fracture to your ribs. You need to absorb this linear energy. But when it comes to the human head and the brain, where the brain is more like butter, and it is more sensitive, it's like a gel, or some extent it's like water when it comes to its shear properties. And the reason for, and that makes the brain more sensitive to rotational motion than the pure linear motion. So we used to compare the brain with a ball of water. When you move the ball like this, the central part of the brain will notice that the skull has started to move. And that's why it gives quite low deformations in the brain when you have a linear impact. But when you rotate the skull, the central part of the brain here will not notice that the skull has started to rotate until after a while. And that's why you get high strains in the brain due to the rotation. And you asked me about what we do in the continued research. And even if we have this biomechanical understanding, we don't have the real understanding on what the injury behind concussion actually is. Concussion is a name of the diagnose. You are diagnosed concussion. But there are several things in the brain that can cause the symptom that you will get from an injury that you call concussion. So still, there's a lot of research needed to understand more about brain injuries, not only concussion, but injuries like diffuse axonal injury or subdural hematoma, etc. So still there needs a lot of research on what the injury actually is and what caused the injury. But what we know today is that rotation is a very important part, and that we can do a lot to even further reduce the rotational energy otherwise transmitted to our brain.
Put it in context for me if you can. I'm curious how much force it takes on, say, a lateral impact to achieve, or how much force I should say it takes on a rotational impact to achieve the same sort of damage to the brain as it would on a lateral impact. I mean, is it, rotational forces are 3 times or 4 times more, dangerous in terms of the speed? Or I'm not wording this very well, but hopefully you can help me out here.
Yeah, it's when you ask questions like that to a researcher like me, you will get either no answer or you will get 100 answers.
Okay.
But I will try to answer it. if you just would take your head like this, and then just move it in a linear way, like that, or if you would take my head and just rotate it perfectly rotation, then I would say that the brain is 6 to 7 times more sensitive to the rotational part.
Oh, wow.
But a normal impact, you of course have both.
Sure.
The linear part and the rotational part. So you need to, of course, take care of both and try to reduce the energy from both the linear and the rotational part. So it is when you have the combination of both a linear and the rotation, and then if you look into the head and the brain is not spherical. I mean, it's a lot of features on the brain that can get into contact with other parts of the skull that is not perfectly smooth. So it is a very tricky question. The only thing we know today is, well, rotation is a very important part, and I would say that it's more important to take care of than the linear part when it comes to the brain. But then when it comes to the skull, it's a linear part that is more dangerous than the rotational part.
Right.
So you need to take care of both.
Is there a threshold, or I guess I'm trying to frame it in the sense of like of what a motorcyclist would care about? I mean, at what speeds are we talking in terms of crashing where the rotational force becomes an issue? Is it 3 miles an hour? Is it 30 miles an hour? Is that a question you can even answer?
Well, we have done different studies. I'll try to make it easy. If this is the head or the helmet, it's actually Swedish tobacco, but it's called snus. But if you take this as a helmet on the ground, and if you impact with a speed in this angle, say it's a 60-degree impact angle, or if you impact at a 30-degree impact angle, you will get complete different head kinematics after the impact, depending also on the impact speed, the material you are impacting. So it's what we are trying to do is by both experimental research and computer-based research to do reconstructions of real accidents, to try to understand when, at what speeds we can, which accidents both that are the most important, but then to understand which accident can we really help out in, where can we make the most difference. But the most important is that we base our test methods on the real accident situation and the most common accident types. But I didn't really answer your question here, I understand that. But I would say if you take a 30 or 45-degree impact scenario, and you fall at, say, 25, 30 kilometers per hour, you can definitely get a concussion. And if you have higher speeds, the concussion can then, instead of a concussion, and if you impact the same impact angle but a higher speed, you would probably get these more severe brain injuries like diffuse axonal injury, which is an overstretching of the axons in the brain, or tearing of the bridging veins leading to subdural hematoma.
And what was interesting in there, you were saying about how you were, recreating these accidents, but you're also using computer simulation for that as well, right? You're doing finite element analysis and using a model of the brain in the computer.
Yes.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it has been a very, very important tool for us to use to be able to go further. I mean, it's difficult to get data from the real life situation, look at different helmets. It's difficult to get real accident data with videos from people falling from the bike and etc. Even if, of course, from Jeep races we can get that kind of information. But the Jeep races are also a bit different from how normal people use their bikes. They're not traveling in 200 kilometers per hour on a flat track and so on. yeah, so we have to search, and using this computer model, we can do. I'm going back to this example. We can do a lot of different type of impacts, different speeds. We have a model of the complete human being that we more or less can throw into the ground
Okay.
and analyze the injury outcome, and from that draw conclusion on how to better design helmets and so on.
That's really interesting to me. I didn't know about the full size human body one. But I always tell people when I'm talking about helmet safety and motorcycle accidents and apparel, motorcycle accidents in particular are such dynamic events. Where they happen, what the road conditions were, if you were on asphalt or concrete or in the dirt, or if you slid into the grass. There's so many different variables that sometimes it seems it's difficult to approach it scientifically, because we seem to just have anecdotal evidence, and the closest we get to a scientific method is a drop test rig, just dropping a helmet from a certain height on against a surface and seeing what happens. So to see the computer modeling come into it, it really seems like that's the next evolution in terms of quantifying safety in a scientific sort of way.
Definitely. So yeah, I mean we spend a lot of effort to create better models, and also we know that just create a computer model of a helmet is not easy. But we have a project right now where we definitely try to create the best possible models, and so that we really can believe in the results. And then have this computer model of the human head and the brain. It's actually one of my colleagues at the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, Sweden. His name is Professor Sven Kleven. He's developed this model that we're using, and there are other models, of course, in the world. So more and more research teams are starting to use these models. It's used in the car automotive industry since many years to design safety cars. But when we started, I saw that the helmet industry are far after the automotive industry when it comes to using this kind of computer-based design, even if there are, of course, good examples in the helmet industry also using the fan helmet method.
Let's switch gears a little bit. If that's the science and that's the research, what's the theory then behind MIPS? How are you mitigating these rotational forces and hopefully making helmets safer?
You mean, how does it work?
Yeah. What's the theory behind what you guys have been developing in terms of keeping the brain from rotating and mitigating that force?
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I already said that MIPS stands for multi-directional impact protection system. So the helmet with the MIPS yellow dot has a system that should work in any type of impact direction. We always reduce the energy transmitted to the brain. Another feature is that we cover the complete area between the helmet and the head with this low friction layer. And we always try to make the helmet decouple from the head with a 10 to 15 millimeters relative motion. And what we actually do in the MIPS helmet is that we try to mimic, we mimic the brain safety system, but we also mimic that you fall on ice. So the MIPS, some people call it a slip plane, we call it a low friction layer, but what we have in the helmet is a low friction layer mimicking that you fall on ice. So instead of that you impact and you grab into the ground and get the rotation, it's like you're sliding and the head and the helmet will continue in the direction it was supposed to go. So you get less rotation in the head and get a decoupling between the helmet and the head. So it's like we are redirecting the rotational energy into translation. So that's one part of trying to understand how MIPS actually works. It's not that we only absorb more energy into the helmet. It's the redirection part that is one of the kind of key features in the MIPS system.
So sorry to interrupt you, but you're basically taking that rotational energy and turning it into lateral energy.
Yeah, we call it linear.
Linear, sorry. Social science major over here. I gotta keep up.
Yeah, but that's one explanation why we see the results when we test the helmet, that we get less rotational energy into the head form, and in the head form we measure both the linear and the rotational acceleration. And so we know that in the test lab, that we get lower rotational energy into the brain. Still, we don't get more linear energy. We always reduce the translation with a few percent. But by redirecting, it's more that we don't stop. I mean, the head will have an initial speed, and it will continue. If it was just a perfect kind of bounce here without rotation, you would have the same speed here when you leave the floor. But it will grab in and it will get the rotation, and that is the rotation here that we try to reduce with this low friction layer mimicking the cerebrospinal fluid.
What are we talking in terms of reduction in harmful rotation? I mean, is it like you said, a few percent? Is it 10%? Is it 5%? Is it 30%?
Well, the few percent I said it was for the linear part. Then when we look into the rotational part, we normally reduce between 10 and 60%. And why I say this span by 10 to 60% is because every helmet is unique. And it can have design features and ventilation channels, etc.
Okay.
So, and also it can be a helmet that from the beginning is performing really good.
Okay.
And for that, it can be difficult to reduce it with the large numbers. While a helmet that performs a little bit less, we can have reductions that are quite large.
Gotcha. That actually kind of weaves in pretty well. There's a question from Yoshi HNS. He was asking about, whether or not the different head shapes that helmets are built around. If you have a round helmet or a long oval or a short oval, do you see differences in how those interact with rotational forces or in their ability to mitigate, or is it more shell construction and whether or not you have like a venting channel or some other shape?
Definitely the shape will have an influence, and if you in the test lab we have one head form per size. Okay, so we have different head forms with different sizes, but they have the same shape kind of. Helmet manufacturers, some make the helmets more round, right, and some more oval, and so on. So we can definitely see that the shape of the helmet design have an effect on the test results. But it's so many parameters, as you said, the shell, if it's glass fiber or plastic shell, if the shell will break, if what kind of EPS densities they are using, and the ventilation and the comfort padding. So it's a lot of things. We can never say that we always reduce by a certain percentage. We only know that we always reduce, but as I said, sometimes it's 10%, sometimes it's 60%, and the mean is somewhere in between.
Okay, that's interesting about the different materials of the shell. I never really thought about that, but I guess it makes pretty good sense. I mean, what's the difference between a plastic shell helmet and, let's say, a fiberglass shell helmet?
Yeah, the plastic shell helmet can of course bounce more to the ground if it's not broken. So it can act like a ping pong ball that could give effects also on the rotational part. If you swing down to the ground and the head will bounce back.
Huh.
The glass fiber, carbon fiber helmets are designed to break and absorb some energy by delamination and fractures and so on. So definitely the composite shell helmets have a protective property in the way they can fracture and be damaged more than a plastic helmet. But from the rotational part, it's not that big difference when we compare a plastic helmet to a carbon fiber helmet. So it's more the linear acceleration that is affected.
Okay.
But as I said in the beginning, the rotation can be affected also if you have the bouncing and get kind of whiplash kind of effects from the neck.
Interesting. Let's talk about the thing that I think I want to know the most about. Why don't we see more MIPS helmets? Why don't we see more helmet manufacturers looking into rotational energy and trying to mitigate that in their helmet designs? What's the biggest hurdle, I guess, in the business side of your operation?
Sorry, I just missed you a little bit. Well, I mean, yeah, okay. Why there are not more motorcycle helmets on the market?
Yeah.
With me. Yeah. Yeah, that's a question I've asked myself as well. To be honest, 2002 we presented MIPS at the Intermot Fair in Europe. I was traveling around together with a colleague at that time. His name was Magnus Are, and we visited a lot of different manufacturers at that fair. We got some interest from 2 manufacturers, and we initiated actually some minor projects with them. But at that time, the MIPS technology was a little bit too expensive, and they didn't really understood the rotational part. Then it took until 2016 before we launched the first motorcycle helmet on the market.
Wow.
Or street helmet. It was Bell that introduced the Bell qualifier. And today we have good traction on the motocross side, where we have most of the big brands on board. But when it comes to moto street helmets, it has been a little bit tougher. It is definitely coming, and there are different reasons for that. We have had more difficulties in the motor segment compared to ski and bike helmets and motocross, where we have had much larger success.
Well, that's kind of my next question. You know, I can't stumble into a bike shop or a ski shop, or I don't ride horses, but I imagine if I ever found myself in a horse outfitter, it's almost impossible not to find a helmet that didn't have MIPS or some sort of competing technology. So what's different about the motorcycle industry compared to, let's say, cycling or snow sports?
Well, there are, of course, many different differences. You have different markets depending on the helmet category. You have different kind of different consumers that have different things that are important for them. I think for motorcycle, I mean, the end consumer, I'm myself a motorcyclist, and of course a motorcycle is the number 1, 2, and 3 kind of, and then it's like, oh yeah, I need a helmet as well. For me, it's a little bit different. Maybe I traveled to Vietnam many years ago, and it took me 1 day to find the motorcycle, but it took me 7 days to find the helmet.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think for motorcycle industry, there was a couple of tough years, let's say 10 years ago, and then the market went up, and we have had I would say, close collaboration with a lot of the brands. But then things like FIM, the coming changes of the C2206 with not very clear information also made the manufacturers not really understand in which direction they should go. So I think there are many reasons for why we haven't come or been more successful into motorcycle helmets. Some of the brands are very, I would say, they want to invent things themselves, and they are a little bit proud in that sense.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Well, that seems to be the struggle. I mean, there's about 12 things there I want to loop back and talk to you about, but since that's one we ended on, it does seem that going forward, brands have, well, maybe they have three choices. They have the choice of doing nothing at all. They have the choice of using someone like yourself, that's offering or licensing their technology, or they have to develop it on their own. The latter being maybe the most difficult, but maybe in the long run, the most financially viable. You're mentioning before that MIPS was quite expensive. I mean, what's it cost now to put MIPS in a helmet? Like, what's the added cost to the helmet manufacturer?
To get the right figure there, I think you have to ask someone else at MIPS. I'm not really into the recent business side. But the price to the end consumer is kind of depending on the price level of the helmet. But it could be maybe $30 or sometimes $50, sometimes less. I know examples of that as well. And then, I mean, the price, I'm not completely sure about the cost for the helmet manufacturer today,
Okay.
to be honest. Yeah.
Let's talk about the standards for a second, because that's something that's really interesting, and that's something that stuck out to me when I visited you guys. There's this need to first of all just agree on a standard. How are we going to test the efficacy of these products? Because it's funny. I was just at a friend's house the other day, and we're looking at her dirt bike helmet that has a rival system in it, and you kind of look at it and you're like, I'm not really sure that does anything. And, she just had a concussion. So you kind of sit there and you kind of wonder, like, well, does this do anything? Is there a way that we can agree on how to measure these different systems?
I think you're pointing towards a very, very, very important part here. I mean, we are definitely not against competitors. We like competitors, and we like to see people developing new systems. We are very open on how we are testing. We are very open sharing information also to competitors. I mean, I've been in contact with some of these competitors, and actually I try to help them to tell them what we are measuring and what I think they also should measure based on science. It's also about how you test the helmet, and it seems quite maybe kind of easy just to put a head form into the helmet, drop it to the ground, measure something. But if you don't really know what you're doing, there are many examples that I have seen when they have tested helmets in a way that is not based on real science, it's not based on the real accident situation. And as long as you do that, we are super happy. That also showed the need for better test methods, better test standards, rating methods that are done in the right way, and that they have control of what they are measuring. Otherwise, this might lead to complete miscommunication to the end consumer, where they think they buy a safe helmet and test it. They say, oh, it's rotational, with failure from the rotational injuries, when they have used a test method that is not correct. So that is a very, very important part of my work today. And I know that there's a lot of other people also working in this direction that supports our finding, and we support their finding. So I think this harmonization is an important part now, so that the end consumer doesn't get confused, because helmets are tested in different ways, and you get apples to pear kind of results.
How involved was MIPS in helping develop the FIM standard, or the upcoming ECE standard? Do you guys have a seat at the table at that, or is it just kind of hoping that those bodies come to the right conclusions?
Yeah. Okay. I've been very, very much involved in the development of the coming new test standard and test method for bike, ski, equestrian helmets in Europe. I'm the convener for one of the working groups in Europe, and we have been working on this for then almost 8 years, and we are very close to presenting this new test method becoming a standard. I have also been trying to work for a harmonization between Europe and US. I attended, I think, 7 or 8 ASTM meetings around US to spread the information from Europe to US, so that we get an harmonization in the test standards. When it comes to FIM and the new motorcycle test standard in Europe, first the FIM, they developed their own test method by themselves in collaboration with Zaragoza University in Spain. I think they made a terrific work within 3 years, coming and put a proposal on the table that was very similar to what we have on our table, where we have been working for, at that time, about 5 years within in the European Standardization Committee. So FIM developed their proposal that was very similar to what we are using also at MIPS when we developed the MIPS helmets. There are some small differences, which I shouldn't get into detail by now. ECE 22.6, that is the new motorcycle test standard, the coming test standard in Europe. There will be a decision on that test standard. I have been to one of these meetings, and I'm here as well, trying just to spread our experience and information on what I think is right and wrong. And I don't say that I made them to change or anything, but ECE 22.6 will, what I have understood, I haven't full insight, but what I have understood is that they a little bit are copying the FIM test method, and they are doing some tweaks on that. And we'll see, I think, in the end of June, what will come out from the next ECE 22.6 meeting.
So if I can just recap that just kind of broadly, the ECE standard is very similar to the FIM standard, which is really similar to the MIPS standard.
Well, I would say they are using, I don't want it to be like they copied, definitely not the MIPS standard.
Sure.
We had a conversation as me in the role of a convener of, it's called Working Group 11 in TC 158. So we had a dialogue and discussing, for example, they're using a different head form than we are proposing to use, but they needed to have a standard at a certain date, so they had to pick what was available, and so there are some potential improvements that can be made, but it's similar in the overall kind of methodologically on how the test is built up. By having a free falling head against a 45-degree impact angled surface. Some people have proposed to use a neck when you test helmets, because all human has a neck.
Right.
But the problem with the neck that is on the market is that it's not human-like enough.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that debate, because whenever I see talk about helmet standards and helmet testing, I feel like the use of the head form, whether it has a neck or that's a full body, it's almost like the oil discussion that motorcyclists have with each other, where you can just kind of go round and round and round and everyone has an opinion.
Yeah.
I'm wondering though, with the testing standards, what does that actually mean in terms of, is it a rating? Is it a pass fail? Is there some sort of number that you come up with and you say, okay, this got a 200 and that one got a 400, so this is twice as good? Or explain to me how that works so it's a little bit more clear.
In the test standards, they only use a pass fail.
Okay. What's that threshold?
A threshold, yeah. And if you look at the old standards where they just drop the helmet straight down, they only measure the linear acceleration, and they had a pass fail of the G forces between 250 and 275 Gs. But that is to reduce the risk for skull fracture. The rotational part, there are other metrics like the rotational acceleration, rotational velocity, and other kind of expressions where there are levels to predict certain risk for a concussion, for example. So we can see from a test how big the risk is from a concussion by measuring the accelerations.
So you're looking at like the angular momentum of the impact?
We're looking at the rotational angle, the rotational velocity.
Okay.
So we drop that, like bang, rotational velocity is 0, and then we impact to get the rotational velocity. And
Okay.
that's coupled with rotational energy.
Okay.
Try to lower this.
Sure.
And reduce the rotational velocity part.
What's the number that's a pass fail for you guys on that?
When we do test at MIPS, we compare a helmet with MIPS to a helmet without MIPS. Okay, so the helmets can start at different amplitudes, but we always reduce the helmet with MIPS significantly.
Okay.
But we also, of course, look at the level. If we see that the helmet has a very high initial rotational velocity, we talk to the helmet brand and say, okay, maybe this helmet needs a little bit further work, or we can get it down to levels that is better or safer.
So are you more concerned then with the change between MIPS versus non-MIPS, or are you striving to hit a certain target of, impact force and rotational speed?
Yeah, that is, I mean, from this is a little bit complicated question.
Okay.
Because, and we have had it a lot. I mean, if we get a helmet from a helmet manufacturer that will go out to the market, and they ask that, can you implement MIPS into this helmet? And we start with a helmet that from the beginning is not the best, I would say. As earlier, all helmets are good, so we don't say that the helmet is bad, but a helmet that is on a higher level. And we reduce that, maybe not dramatically, but significantly. And we know that MIPS will make a difference in this helmet. Still, the helmet is maybe not one of our best. Should we say no to that helmet manufacturer or helmet model, or should we try to make that helmet as good as possible? So it is a question that we have been struggling with, but we have taken the decision always to try to make the specific helmet model the best we can.
Gotcha. Okay. I just want to give fair warning to our viewers. We've got another 10, 15 minutes left. So get your questions in the comment section and soon so I can get them into the chat. Peter, talk to me about why MIPS doesn't make its own helmet. Why are you just licensing a technology?
We started with our own helmet. It was an equestrian helmet that was launched to the Swedish market 2007. but we decided after that. I mean, I traveled 25 times forth and back to China to make this helmet to happen. It's a lot of work, and our mission and ambition is to save as many lives as possible. And then the ingredient brand model was a model where we thought we could reach more helmet models, more helmet brands, and get more helmets out instead of doing it ourselves.
That seems to be the biggest issue for me. I mean, I swear the backdrop is what I always have on my chats. It's not just because you're on today, but you know, I have a helmet that I prefer to wear on the racetrack and on the street. Unfortunately, it doesn't have MIPS or any sort of other rotational technology. What am I supposed to do? I mean, is there ever going to be a possibility that there could be an add-on insert, like a liner that maybe MIPS develops, or am I just kind of stuck in this limbo, or maybe having to choose a different helmet because that manufacturer doesn't want to build one? Well, how do you address those riders?
I hope that there will be more helmet models out soon, including MIPS, or I would say also other rotational technologies that is proven to work. But if you think of retrofitting systems into helmets by the end consumer, him or herself, we have had problem from legal perspective to work in that direction. So it is, we have thought about it, but for different reasons we have decided not to go on that road. Okay,
interesting. I see Charles has a number of questions, and one of them kind of ties into that. You know, what are the patent limitations, you know, for companies that want to develop their own systems? I know MIPS has a bevy of patents, and I think even just recently acquired another company for their technology. What's this landscape look like? I mean, are you guys cornering the market?
No, we of course try to protect our technology, but we also, I mean, we sell the technology to anyone that wants to buy it. Of course, they need to pass our approval test and so on. But still, I mean, it's definitely room for many players on the market. We are trying to do our best to get the MIPS into as many helmets as possible. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that answered the question, but it's not that we kind of say no to helmet brands. Everyone is welcome, and I think that is the best answer.
Okay. I wanted to address some of the, let's say, I was going to say myths, but I think that might be unfair, but some of the pushback that I hear sometimes about this kind of technology. One of the first ones I hear from helmet manufacturers is that, you know, their design is exceptionally round, and therefore by that property achieves the same goal. I mean, does the data back that claim up?
Parts of it. I wouldn't say that just to make the helmet round. I mean, MIPS would do the same protection in such a round helmet, but to make the helmet rounder and smoother is of course positive for not getting something to grab into the ground. So if you look at the motocross helmets with a kind of square shape design features, mm-hmm. It's of course worse to have that than a round smooth helmet. But MIPS will do the same improvement into a real round and smooth helmet. Because when you impact to the ground, what happens is that even if the helmet is round and smooth, when the normal force is high enough and the coefficient of friction is high enough, the helmet will start to rotate. And that rotation will then propagate into the brain. So that's why a slip plane for that kind of helmet would also make the same difference as in helmets that are not perfectly round and smooth.
What about hair? Does hair work like a slip plane? Because you look at the head forms that you guys work with, and they're all bald guys.
Yeah.
When you look at more like what the human body looks like, we have a full head of hair. Does that play a factor into it, or how does that work?
Everything plays a factor, definitely.
Okay.
But we have seen the same reductions with when we put the wig on the head form.
Huh.
So testing a MIPS helmet and then putting a wig on the head form and compare a helmet with and without MIPS, we do get the same amount of reduction.
I think I'm just about out of questions. Let's see if there's any more in the chat. I think Charles was asking another one about just is there pushback from helmet manufacturers, especially on the street side, just because they don't want to pay a licensing fee, or is it a philosophical decision? Obviously there's gonna be different manufacturers with different reasons. So how do you break them up? Is it more than one than the other?
Well, some helmet manufacturers are driven by safety. Some are driven by just earning money. So we can divide them into this two. But also with helmet manufacturers that are driven by safety, sometimes we do have problems to get into their helmet model because it's already certified. And to recertify a helmet, implementing MIPS and recertifying is a large cost. So we try to get into the design process as soon as possible, so that MIPS doesn't add an extra kind of certification fee. So there are things like that as well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I always talk about how it takes 3 to 5 years to develop a motorcycle from kind of concept to production. What's the time frame for motorcycle helmets? Hopefully not that long.
No, but I would say between 18 and 24 months.
Okay.
Now I'm talking about the brands, the series brands.
Uh-huh.
Brands that will just develop something and sell it, and yeah.
So even if a helmet company sees this video today and realizes they've got to get on board with the MIPS train, we're talking 1.5 to 2 years before that helmet potentially would be on the market and available for us.
Yeah, but no, I was talking about the lead time from a helmet manufacturer when they start the design of a helmet until it's ready.
Okay.
If the helmet or implementing a system like MIPS, we can do it, say, within 3 months, or say plus minus, depending on the complexity of the helmet. But it can go really fast. So MIPS is not the reason for this long lead time.
Okay, I guess I see what you're saying. So if I'm going to start a new helmet from the ground up, 1.5 to 2 years to design it, develop it, put it in production, commercialize it. If I want to take a design off one of these, the shelf back here, and incorporate MIPS into it, working with you guys, we're talking roughly 3 months to get that figured out.
Yeah, and then you have the recertification, which, it's out of my hands to say. It can take probably an extra month or 3 months, depending if they will get the helmet into the certification schedule.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes more sense. Well, Peter, I think that's about all I have for you today. I want to thank you so much for coming and talking to me and my viewers. I think this is a huge deal for the motorcycle industry and for helmet protection. It's good to finally have a conversation about helmet safety when we're talking about helmets, and not just what color the helmet is or how round it is.
Yeah.
So, hopefully this will be an ongoing thing, and hopefully we'll see more helmets taking this idea more seriously. So thank you again, and thank you to our viewers, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Stay safe.
You too.